So just a high-level agenda here today. We're just going to be introducing briefly DMS InsightWorks as well as DMS iTech. The company itself is called DMS Companies. There's 3 divisions. So the 2 that we primarily want to focus on today is the InsightWorks, which provides and develops software that integrates directly into Microsoft Business Central, and then the iTech side, which is the IT infrastructure and support side. And as Brian mentioned, we've been doing that for quite some years through multiple iterations of it started out as Dynamics Nav, and is now known as, or Navision for that matter, pardon me, and it's now named Business Central. So yeah, some cloud terminology, some Business Central hosting options, and why would you want to choose Business Central on-premise Azure hosted VM over the other cloud-based versions. And on-premise doesn't necessarily mean that it is on your premises, and we'll go through some of that. And then Business Central on-premise and what you should know, and then some question and answers. So let's get going. So with that, DMS InsightWorks, as I mentioned, it's obviously an integral part of the DMS companies. We're a global developer of manufacturing and distribution software that can be obtained from the Microsoft App Source. We have offices in Canada, United States, and Europe. And we are a leader known throughout Microsoft as well as such, of operational productivity improvements through Microsoft Business Central, like I mentioned, the add-ons that we provide. And we are, or they are, a sister company to DMS iTech. So now some more about DMS iTech. It's obviously as well an integral part of the DMS companies. We've been a fully managed service provider, or MSP, since 2008. We provide hardware and software sales, implementation support, and cloud subscriptions for any size business. And we do have a lot of in-depth knowledge on our team, and we obviously work very closely with the other sides of the business with implementation support, also for knowledge transfer and everything else. And like I mentioned earlier on, phone calls that are a little bit more in depth in regards to your environment. We do a lot of collaboration to ensure that both sides of that fence with the software as well as with the infrastructure is met accordingly, and is going to be there for the longevity of your implementation. And obviously, sister company to InsightWorks. So some cloud terminology, and a lot of people throw around the word cloud quite loosely. So SaaS, which is software as a service, cloud, on-premise, perpetual, and subscription are all used to describe what is and is not cloud. For the purposes of this presentation, we want to focus on Business Central Cloud, which refers to the Microsoft hosted Business Central, or the SaaS model. So that is the model that Microsoft hosts everything for you. You do not have a lot of in-depth ability to customize or modify things, but it is one of the offerings that Microsoft provides for Business Central. And then Business Central on Azure, which is really what we're going to be talking about mostly today, which is Business Central that is hosted on the Microsoft Azure environment or Azure virtual machines, and either using it as a subscription or perpetual on-premise licensing for that. So in order to deploy Dynamics 365 Business Central, you have the following licensing options. And there isn't one kind of solution that suits all organizations. Totally, as I mentioned earlier, it totally does depend on your business requirements and needs. So the cloud version of Business Central is not as flexible and as adaptable as the on-premise version. Some key benefits of the cloud or SaaS model is for smaller companies and are less complex requirements in companies who don't have the time or resource internally or even external, or the expertise to run the Business Central on-premise version. The cloud version can be the right solution for them. They do have a faster implementation timeline usually. That is due to the less complexity or the reduced complexity. There is access to add-ons through AppSource. There is a tight integration with other cloud products, primarily with the Microsoft Cloud offerings. And there's obviously a less hardware investment and maintenance requirement for that model. So some key benefits of the on-premise model. In short, you have far more control over the environment and the applications that reside on it. The environment is very adaptable and can be configured precisely to the necessity of your business, and that is regardless of how complex it may be. Some of the key features to keep in mind is that you do retain full ownership of your business information. You can efficiently manage and control updates related to the environment and applications. And it does allow you to generate business focus, intelligent reports, including SQL Server reporting services and some others. So the Business Central on-premise is an extremely flexible model and can be tailored exactly to the needs of your business. So no matter how complex these may be, in other words, Business Central on-premise can run business processes in exactly the way that's needed, regardless of which type of business you run or in which industry you are running them in. So, as mentioned earlier, today's discussion is going to be primarily about Microsoft Azure VM hosted on-premise Business Central licensing model. So with that, so why would you choose the Business Central on-premise Azure hosted VM? So you have far more control, that being for things like SQL Server settings and performance tuning, access to configure Business Central and associated or integrated applications. So again, all the, or primarily a lot of the cloud offerings, the applications that can be integrated into the SaaS model can also be integrated into the on-premise model. So there is a lot more flexibility. You can also manage a lot of the underlying IT infrastructure. So for example, your hard drives, your RAM, your CPU, and a lot of other related allocations. You can also choose which version of SQL. So you can run SQL Express. So that is the free version of Microsoft SQL Server. There is a database size limit to 10 gigabytes. After that, you do need to get into different modeling of, or a model of SQL Server. That can be standard, enterprise, whatever the right fit is for your organization. Software updates for both the underlying infrastructure, so the hardware and or the operating system, as well as the Business Central offering is more controlled through the on-premise version or model. We have had customers that were, I would say, a little bit sideswiped with the SaaS model, so that is the cloud offering in Microsoft, where there was updates provided or implemented by Microsoft with or without notification to the end user, and the following business day, somebody tried to use the system to find out that there was an incompatibility to the update, etc. So some work had to be done in order to get things back to normal, and that is one of the downfalls that I will mention with the SaaS model, is that you don't have control over the updates. Microsoft deems when necessary to implement them, and they do so without usually checking a lot of the other implications of doing that. As well, third-party backups for the SaaS version is currently quite complicated to set up and configure. I'm not saying there isn't a means of doing that, but it is a little bit more involved, pardon me, and does take a little bit more work to get that off the ground and implemented. So on-premise doesn't have to mean on your premises. And when I say that, some people are under the impression that the server or the environment has to be within the four walls of your company. And that is definitely not the case. It can be a shared or dedicated virtual machine or VM on Amazon Web Services or similar cloud hosting, obviously Microsoft Azure. But with that said, it can also be in a co-location site. So if you currently have some server environments or some of your computing in a co-location site, it can also be hosted there, or it can also be hosted in the four walls of your organization. So. Or obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it's a dedicated VM on Microsoft Azure that is under the customer's control. And when I say customer's control, it's under your control. Again, you can change out how many CPU, how much RAM, how much hard disk, allocations to time, how much time can be spent there, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot that can be configured specifically to your requirements. So what you should know. So subscriptions, you can go directly through the Microsoft to get your subscription, or through a partner like DMS iTech. And some of the benefits I'm going to talk about in regards to going through a partner in a minute here, but there are a lot of different packages and options to choose from. And what we normally recommend is you start small and you scale up from there in order to accommodate or to facilitate how much computing power you need, again, being CPU, RAM, hard drive space, etc. And to help people, Microsoft have implemented a Azure sizing tool. It's called the Azure Pricing Calculator, which can be very in-depth, detailed, and can be quite cumbersome and confusing to people that don't do this for a living every day. I will say even from us, we have people certified in all of the Azure environments, as well as the Microsoft 365 offerings. So the Office, or Office 365 as people used to know it, Microsoft has changed that naming convention in the last while. But we do have people certified in all this, and whenever there's changes, we have to obviously get better acquainted as to what's what and what's going on with that. So definitely have a look at that. But as I mentioned before, it can be quite complicated and convoluted, and to some people frustrating and confusing, which is unfortunate. So it can definitely be confusing. So it looks like this, looks nice and clean right from the onset. And then once you start plugging away at trying to configure your environment, what we've seen a lot of people find out or find that they come back with is it looks a lot like this. And just as a side note, the picture on the right is actually of an actual customer that we've helped obviously clean this up. They came to us and said, we have a bit of a problem with our wiring. And then we said, okay, well, let's see what that looks like. And so they sent us a photograph. And, okay, let's clean that up. Anyways. So yeah, what Business Central on-premise, what you should know, some more information. So the Azure SQL databases, once they are created, the billing cannot be stopped. So you are billed per database. If you want to stop the billing for that specific database, the database has to be deleted in order for Microsoft Azure to understand, okay, they're no longer using this. One instance of a database can have one implementation of a database can have several instances. So for example, if you want to have a test dev environment, that's great. If you want to have a live environment, obviously, etc. So one installation of SQL, like standard SQL on-premise or that you purchase, can have several instances. Just knowing that if you want to stop the billing, you don't just turn it off, you have to actually physically delete the database. So if you turn off the database, billing is still in effect, there is no stop button to it. Ssl certificates. So these are a very important aspect and integral component of providing not only affirming the identity of your business, it does help satisfy PCI and DSS requirements if those are applicable to your business. And it does improve customer confidence and trust, amongst other things, that you are who you say you are, and to have that additional layer of security. We find a lot of customers aren't aware of this, or they just don't understand what the implications of not having that. If anybody's browsed to a website that doesn't have a SSL certificate currently, you'll see that your little lock on your browser, usually depending on which browser you use, but it'll tell you that it's either insecure or have a little stroke through the little lock to inform the user that this is not deemed a safe environment. So integrating SSL certificates isn't only for websites, it's also for applications like the one we're talking about today. So just continuing on a little bit. So for Azure virtual machine hostings, it's yours. It's just hosted on the Microsoft environment. You're still responsible for your Azure virtual environment, or your VM. Like I said, it's just hosted on the Microsoft environment. You can think of it the same as if you spun up a VM at the office, and you still need to manage and maintain it. So that means patching, updating, backups, all kinds of security, all kinds of things like that. So we did have a customer that, not picking on them, but they went through the calculator, they deemed it was all good. They just said next, finish. They thought they had a great environment, and then they were running into some trouble with some items on that hosted environment. And when we took a closer look, we went back to the calculator, and he deemed that, yeah, we just assumed that this would all be good and nice, and they were not only paying more than they should have monthly, but the environment wasn't quite configured properly to their requirements and needs. So for architectural and security considerations, things like bandwidth, remote access. So that can be, remote access can be through RDP or virtual machine or VPN, pardon me, or other. Two-factor authentication, backups, redundancy, and several other factors should be thought through. And properly sizing and scaling the environment is very important. So again, a lot of people aren't under the understanding that, okay, well, I have to put antivirus on this environment. I have to be able to access it. Oh, how do we access that most securely? Is it through a VPN tunnel, or is it through RDP, et cetera, et cetera? Azure backups are available, but they are not included by default. There is several third-party solutions that are available for this. There's many, actually. We suggest a couple that we've worked with and that we do work with on a regular basis that we're very comfortable suggesting and showing you the pros and cons of. So these can be software like Veeam, Cohesity, Rubrik, Commvault, Veritas, and there's many, many more, as I mentioned. Regional settings. So geo redundancy has been designed for, but it is not automatic. So currently there's 2 Microsoft data centers in Canada. So those are in central Canada, considered Ontario, and eastern Canada, considered Quebec. There's 8 in the US and a total of 200 or more data centers across 34 countries. So Microsoft is currently one of the largest data center market, right alongside the likes of Amazon and Google. And the geo redundancy is not an automatic setting. And also, I don't want people to confuse geo redundancy to being a backup. What geo redundancy actually means is that in the event of a failure of your primary data center, the secondary, if it's configured, geo redundant site will take over the processing and the serving up of the application in the environment that it's hosted on. This by no means that it's a backup. So if it's not a backup and restore files, folders, databases, your entire environment for that matter, it's strictly to ensure that the computing is available to the end user. With respect to deploying SQL Server, Azure SQL is what we recommend only. It's better than SQL Express, so there is no 10 gigabit limit or gigabyte per limit. It does include backups of the database, and there is a less upfront cost as opposed to purchasing your own SQL licensing. The included SQL backups are up to 7 days of data retention for the cheapest option and up to 35 days of data retention for the standard options. You can definitely get the longer data retention periods, but there is an extra charge for that. And when I say data retention, that means, for example, if I delete a file today and I come back and I have, say, a 30-day retention period, I can come back within that 30-day time frame and recover my file, folder, database, whatever it is that you do want to recover, the entire virtual machine, whatever that is. If you have a 30-day retention period or set up as a 30-day retention period, and on day 32 you decide you need to recover something, unfortunately that data or whatever that is you're trying to recover is gone. So that is what retention is all about. So with that said, if a customer does have available SQL licensing and they wish to move them to an Azure virtual environment, that may definitely be possible. What we strongly recommend is that we, or you, or whoever, does interface with Microsoft directly to ensure that that Microsoft licensing or the SQL licensing is adequate and correct for the environment that it's being hosted on, that being Azure. Some other things to consider, so some architectural consideration, internet bandwidth, do you have enough? So again, with cloud, everybody's under the assumption, I shouldn't say everybody, some people is a better word for that, is under the assumption that it's in the cloud, it's safe, it's backed up, it's accessible from anywhere, which is, those are all true statements. One of the downsides of cloud computing for some people when they don't have that adequate bandwidth is some people say, for example, in remote locations, and we have several customers in this dilemma currently where they do want to put stuff on the cloud for all the benefits of the cloud. However, they don't have suffice internet bandwidth for the amount of users to be able to productively access that information and work within that environment. So for example, some remote locations, either they need satellite internet, which with latency is horrible, slow keystrokes take 10, 15 seconds to catch up to what's actually being typed. To say, for example, they have 30 users and they have 1.5 megabit per second internet connectivity. So trying to stuff 30 user sessions through a 1.5 megabit session is atrociously painful for the user. So IP restrictions. So within Azure, you can set IP restrictions as to which IP ranges or which IP addresses can access your Azure environment. It's just another layer of security that can be added. And I'm pretty sure most people are aware that anything Microsoft related, Azure related, even for that matter, Google hosting, Amazon hosting, those types of environment are always under critical attacks, and they are high profile targets. So for the people that we don't want to have access to those environments. So VPN, virtual private network, from your location to the Azure environment is definitely also highly recommended. Multi-factor authentication, we very highly recommend this as well. That's not only for accessing your Azure environment, it's accessing any of your cloud computing, even for that matter, your local, if you're getting users logging in from outside of the confines of your four walls or wherever your servers or your environment's being hosted. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is definitely something that should be employed right now. It is an industry standard, has been for approximately 5 years now, and definitely we strongly recommend that everybody's using that. And antivirus. By this time and day and age, nobody should be running any applications or any environment without having the proper antivirus in place. So with all that said, I know I've covered off quite a bit of information in a very short period of time. I appreciate you very much joining our webinar today, but please, if you do have any questions, now is a good time to pose them if you haven't already. And also with that, if there is something that you think of, say, in a couple of days or later on today, and you do have some questions, I'm going to be leaving the contact for, there we go, some fancy stuff going on here. So yeah, any questions, any comments, anything that you want some clarity on, please email us at the following email address or give us a call, and we'll get you in touch with somebody that can definitely address any of your questions and comments.